Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, which is entitled Gearing Up for Lateral Season, the Use of Law Firm Retirement Data and League Tables. My name is Patrick Fuller. I am serving as a moderator and as a panelist and general all-around participant in this afternoon's webinar. We're going to go for about 45 minutes today. As an attendee, everybody is automatically muted. I do want to make sure that everybody utilizes GoToWebinar and the question feature where they can submit questions into the queue. We are going to be answering those in some cases as we're going throughout the webinar, but also at the end of the program, we've set aside some time, as we normally do, for questions from everybody. I am sure that there are going to be a significant number of questions during this as we get into the data that is here. So feel free to utilize the chat feature and the question feature on GoToWebinar, and we will answer as many of those as we can get to. So with that said, I'd like to welcome everybody officially to this and introduce to you my co-panelists and presenters for today. The first one is Eric Ryles, who is our VP of Customer Solutions, and Elizabeth, aka Liz DeVito, who is our Associate Director of Management Consulting. So Eric and Liz, welcome. And Eric, why don't you start by giving your background for everybody out there that may not know you?
Sure, I'd imagine that's most people. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eric Ryles. I am the Vice President of Customer Solutions at ALM's Intelligence Division. I've made my home for the last 17 years in the world of employee benefits by managing a business unit at ALM called Judy Diamond Associates, and that's why I'm here today. At Judy Diamond, I work with individual financial advisors as well as big giant firms like AXA and Charles Schwab, John Hancock, and others to help them refine their customer acquisition and retention strategies for the employer-sponsored retirement market. In plain English, what that means is that I spend most of my day helping big financial services companies figure out how to best position and market their 401k plans to employers who might be looking to make a change in their 401k representation. Liz?
Okay, hi, good afternoon, everybody, and greetings from New York City. My name is Liz DeVito, and I am a market research analyst in ALM's Information Services Division. And the market that I focus on is management consulting services, and within management consulting, very specific segments that have to do with HR consulting, including employee benefits consulting. And that's why I'm here today. So prior to joining ALM, I was a market intelligence professional at Mercer, which some of you may know as a benefits consulting firm. Although they do a lot more than that now, the human capital consulting. And anyway, so I have a little bit of knowledge about how this data is used for business purposes, and that's why I'm here today, to kind of add some insights in that regard. So back to you, Patrick.
All right, great, thanks, Liz, and appreciate that. For those of you that don't know my background, which like Eric is probably going to be a lot of you here, I am now into my past my second decade within the legal profession. I know the picture makes it look like I'm, eternally 28 years old, and that is the entire objective there with the headshot. But I am now well into my second decade, actually into my third decade in the legal profession, having spent time as a consultant, having spent time working with corporate legal departments on analytics and data with law firms. I've carried a bag and been in business development. I've done a variety of things over my career, and it's a pleasure to be with everybody today. As we get into this, there's going to be a lot of information. I'm going to turn it over to Eric here in just a second, as we're going to dig into some really compelling information and the ways that it can be used by law firms. I know we have several people that are joining us from that are recruiters. We have several joining us as well that are from legal departments. And so we're going to touch on a variety of uses for a lot of this data as we go through our program this afternoon. So Eric, I want to start first with you. Let's get into the main feature here today, which is really the benefits data. And this data originates with you and your team. Kind of walk us through what exactly you brought into Legal Compass and why it's so important.
Sure. So the more eagle-eyed Legal Compass users among you may have noticed about 3, maybe 4 weeks ago, a new tab appeared within your Legal Compass subscription when you were looking at an individual law firm. It's the Retirement Benefits tab down here. And no surprise, it has information on retirement benefits. We're not trying to be sneaky. All of the data that we have amassed originates with the government. Specifically, there is an IRS Department of Labor form called the Form 5500. This is a kind of an employee benefits plan disclosure form required by the ERISA Act of '74. Essentially, what it is every company in the country with a 401k or a traditional pension plan has to file one of these forms. And on this form, we get all kinds of interesting information about their retirement package. We know things like how many people are in the plan, how many dollars are in the plan, what are the average contributions from both the employees as well as from the employer, in this case, the law firm. So there's all kinds of cool stuff that we can do in here. And a big part of my day job over at Judy Diamond is taking this information and compartmentalizing it in such a way that my financial services clients can identify employer groups that may be dissatisfied with their 401k plan. So what we've done is we've brought over all of the critical metrics that we use to make those decisions on that side of the house into Legal Compass. So you can see kind of the first batch of our data here. We've got our plan score. We've got the number of participants, number of retirees, total assets at the firm. Again, these are total retirement assets, and the amount of money flowing into the plan from both the participants as well as from the firm. Now, one thing that you'll notice is we've got this really cool rank among AmLaw 200 column here. The reason for that is because we ranked every one of these firms. We brought in the information on the AmLaw specifically, and then we used our kind of proprietary consolidation methodology to lump all these plans together, aggregate the data, and figure out which firms are going to provide the best possible retirement outcomes for the employees of the firm. And so one of the key metrics that we use to do that is our plan score, which you can see here. So plan score is essentially just us looking at 7 different metrics of plan performance, calculating the actual value, and then determining how many plans all across the country is that metric better than. So when I see that the firm has participant contributions of $10,572 per person, that's interesting, but data in a vacuum isn't super meaningful. That's why we have the rank. The rank of 92 tells me that this is a higher value than 92% of all other companies all across the country. We do this for these 7 metrics, smush them together, and that creates a plan score, which really allows us to quantitatively judge one plan versus another. Patrick, is that the kind of info you were looking for?
No, it is, and I think it's, first of all, I think it's incredibly interesting as we look at this. But as we dive into this, Eric, I think a couple of things are coming to mind or popping up to me in terms of questions that I'd love to get your take on. One is, we're looking at this with a national plan score here of 78. How does that compare to the rest of the AmLaw 200? Is it only the AmLaw 200, or are we looking at how this compares with all the other businesses that are filing Form 5500s? And then the second question off of that, though, too, is what's a good median score? How do we actually quantify this from that standpoint? What's a good median score, and how should people be looking at this information for that?
Okay, so both very good questions. So the first answer is the national plan score itself is actually us looking at one of these law firms and comparing it not just against the AmLaw 200, but against literally 520,000-ish other 401k plans all across the country. The way that we are comparing amongst the AmLaw is if we kind of scroll back up here, we've got the rank among the AmLaw column, and here we can see how it ranks among the AmLaw. So these numbers would go down to the 200th spot and as high as number 1. This plan is actually a fairly good plan. We can see here the plan score of 79, which is definitely above median, which is in the mid to high 60s. We can see that it ranks 14th among the 200 firms of the AmLaw 200. in terms of how we utilize this information, there are a couple of different things that we can do with this and kind of why this information matters. So in preparation for actually bringing this stuff into Legal Compass, I had a number of phone calls with legal recruiters, both those who are independent as well as those who work at a firm. And the same kind of themes came up over and over again, which is that when you're trying to attract a lawyer, you want to talk about more than just the annual compensation. What's the take-home pay, right? You want to look at the total package, and a big part of that package is the retirement plan. The reason that I say this is because for a lawyer at a firm, the difference between having a top-notch retirement package and one that's more in the bottom tier, by the time you're done over a lifetime of being a lawyer, can be literally hundreds of thousands, in some cases, even maybe $1 or $1.5 million. There's that much of a difference between what's going on with the plans. You want to look at how generous the company is, what the match rates are, what the rates of return are. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there. And for firms that already have a solid plan in place, being able to quantitatively say, yes, our plan ranks here and this other firm you're looking at ranks here, can make a real difference in bringing someone into the organization. Now, I'm never going to sit here and tell you that a plan score of 78 is so much better than a plan score of 76 that we're talking about two different realms. The scoring is not that precise. What I will tell you is that a plan score of 78, yeah, it's better than a plan score of 65 by a considerable margin. Once you get to that kind of 10-point differential, you're looking at some real substantial additional money.
Perfect. So as we move into some of the other data through here, what else are you finding when you dive into this data, and what are the differences between some of the different plans that are out there?
So yeah, I figured it might be good to do kind of a definition of terms for our legal audience. So in general, there are two big types of retirement packages. On the one hand, you've got what are called defined contribution plans. And the gist of a defined contribution plan is that the amount of money that you're going to have when you retire is defined by the contributions that you, the employee, make during the course of your working career. Defined contribution plans are great. There's a lot of pros there. The 401k is by far the most well-known type of defined contribution plan, but it's not the only one. And even if a company has a 401k, there are other elements that they can bring into the plan. Most commonly, profit sharing. There are employer matches to consider beyond just straight profit sharing. And of course, the defined contribution plan is portable. You take it with you when you go from employer to employer. Now, the problem with a defined contribution plan from the perspective of our highfalutin lawyer audience, right, is that there's a real sharp limit on how much money you can contribute to one of these plans. For 2020, you can only put in $19,500 of your own money into a 401k plan. Whether it's a traditional 401k or a Roth 401k, doesn't matter. $19,500 is how much you can put in. And for a lawyer who might be making $350,000 to $400,000 a year, that's not always enough to get the job done. So enter the defined benefit plan on the right. The defined benefit plan is the more traditional type of pension plan. That's you go and you work at the same place for 30 years, and when you retire, you get the gold watch and a check every other week for the rest of your life. That's a DB plan. That's a defined benefit plan. The pros of a DB plan are that you can save a lot more money in a DB plan than you can in a DC plan. A lot of the restrictions on how much can go in are removed. The other pro, from the perspective of a lawyer in one of these plans, is that the law firm contributes a substantial amount of money to these plans. Depending on the plan design, it can even be all of the money. There's a kind of a hybrid DB-DC plan called a cash balance plan, which when we were looking at all the AmLaw 200, a lot of them had cash balance plans in place. These are the ones where we find the law firms putting in sometimes as much as $30,000, $40,000 a year per participant in the plan. That's real money, even before you get to the magic of compound interest and what those savings can accrue over 30, 40 years at the firm. Now, the problem with DB plans, of course, is that it puts an obligation on the law firm to make those payments, right? And lawyers are a group that you kind of don't want to screw on legal contracts. So there's a risk for law firms that have these DB plans. They have to make sure that they're fully funded, that they're meeting their pension obligations, or hilarity can ensue. So as a result, these kinds of plans are not as common as they once were, certainly, but they're not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, I don't want to date myself on this, but I kind of thought that they sort of like went out during, let's just say, when Flight Pants and the mall was still a viable alternative to hang out. You know, sort of like where the Goldbergs are set now. Sort of that time frame. Is that, you mentioned that they're still around. How common are they at this point?
So I'm going to answer that question in two different ways. The first way is among the general populace of all companies in America, there are very, 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 very few that offer an active defined benefit plan. Now, those guys aside, law firms are a different animal, right? You've got a lot of very highly compensated, highly motivated individuals. And as a result of that, DB plans are much, much more common there, especially among the AmLaw 200. Our research showed us there were about, I want to say about 130-ish of the AmLaw 200 that still had some kind of a defined benefit plan in place. Of those, about half are what we call frozen plans. And in a frozen plan, they're not letting any new kids into the clubhouse. They've got the plan, and people in the plan might continue to accrue benefits, but if you're a newly hired lawyer, you can expect to not be invited into that plan. The plan is frozen. It's not accepting new participants, but they are paying out the obligations on the old one. That leaves us with about 60 or so firms that actually do have an active defined benefit plan that one can get into if one meets certain eligibility requirements. And that's something else that we researched and put in a legal compass, is exactly what those eligibility requirements are for those AmLaw firms that do offer a current DB plan.
Right. So just so I'm clear, with the ones that are frozen, are you sort of giving the advice that everybody should just let it go? Curious. I'm probably the only one that got that reference.
I got it.
Yes, you're probably the only one with the dial, Patrick. That's probably what you do.
Oh, man alive. That's the problem with having kids and watching all those movies. Liz, I want to come back to you, Liz, very quickly on this, because I'm curious,
Sure.
you know, from your perspective, given your background, why is it important for everybody to know about the different types of retirement plans?
Well, I'll get to that in a second. I just want to say first that Eric is really making me wish I were a 60-year-old lawyer with a defined benefit plan. I would be planning my trip around the world right now.
Amen.
But anyway, getting back to why this is good to know about, these two different kinds of plans, and this is from the business perspective. It's because the employer has different obligations that they need to meet with each type of plan. And I'm not just referring to how much they're liable for in terms of paying out benefits, which of course a defined benefit plan is the biggest liability, because that essentially converts into a lifetime annuity for the lawyer who has it, who's lucky enough to have it. But there are also other considerations when you have these plans. There's the cost of administering the plan. You know, so for example, with a defined contribution plan, the employer ends up with this very large pool of assets, of money. These are the contributions that their employees have made. These monies have to be managed, and it's usually they need outside help with that, an investment management consulting firm or an investment manager from a bank or something. But the employer wants to make sure that those assets grow faster and bigger than what they're liable for in terms of paying out later. So there's a whole science around this. I won't get into that, but this is something that's important for the CFO at the least in the law firm to know about. And with a defined benefit plan, there are also administration costs, because remember, the employer is going to be writing those annuity checks for the rest of that person's life.
Right.
So very often DB plans are administered by a third-party vendor. They may decide to do it in-house, but there's considerations around the cost of administering the plans. Those are just two very, obvious examples, I think. But I think that the really great thing about having both kinds of information in Legal Compass is that the law firms, this information is simply not readily available for private companies, and law firms are practices, they're private.
Mhm.
And so here it all is in Legal Compass, and it's massaged for intelligence purposes. So there's a lot of different ways you can use it, and I'm sure that all of you will find different ways, creative ways to use it as well.
So, Eric, coming back to you a little bit, and I know you and Liz are going to jump into this here, but as we actually look into the data and reading the data, and as we go back in there and say, okay, what should we be looking for in this? Can you kind of walk us through how to actually dive into some of the data that's now in Legal Compass?
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to look at two screens here. We're going to look at one screen for how you read and interpret a defined contribution plan, and then one for reading those DB plans. So here we are on the defined contribution screen. Again, you'll find this within Legal Compass. You'll click on retirement benefits, and this will be the first thing that you see. So we start with kind of a summary, which is an aggregation of every DC plan the company has. It's not uncommon for a company to have more than one plan. Sometimes it's because they have one plan for their legal people and one plan for their not legal people. We actually saw one company that had one plan for everybody whose last name was A to L and another plan for everybody whose last name was M to Z. Not sure why they broke it up that way, but that's the kind of thing that happens. So we aggregate all that together to create this big DC plan summary picture. So here we can see again the values of our various metrics of performance and our rank amongst the AMLaw. Where we get into more detail about each individual plan is in this screen that we can see below. So here we can see the number of participants, number of retirees, as Liz mentioned, total assets. So this is their defined contribution plan. So these assets are the assets of the lawyers or whoever else is participating in the plan, and they're portable. So when they leave, those assets can go with them. So there's a couple things that we can look at on here that we can kind of figure out what's going on with the company by interpreting this information. So first things first, you can generally tell, and again, this is not a hard and fast rule, it's directional, right? If the company is actively increasing their contributions, that is, the law firm is putting in more money per participant on behalf of the participant than they were in previous years, as we can see here by the growth, right? So the firm contributions are up 2.2%. A firm in financial distress, not going to be doing that, right? This is one of those areas that's kind of a completely optional thing for the law firm to do. And I have never seen a company that is really doing poorly, and this applies outside of the legal industry as well, that's actively increasing the amount they're putting in. You can think of this almost like dividends for a publicly traded company. When GE is not doing well, they don't pay out that same dividend, and then of course the stock price suffers, and we all kind of learn about that the hard way. We've also got this chart here on the right in the circle. Because this is a PowerPoint slide, I can't actually click that little triangle by total assets, but this is a drop-down menu, right, of the same type you'd see anywhere in Legal Compass. You can click it, and you can see a bunch of different metrics that you can then graph over the past 5 years. Total assets is probably the least useful of all of the things that we're graphing, and it's still pretty useful, but total assets is usually driven by things like market rate of return. The market in 2018, the most recent year for which data is available, was down about 5.5%. That was what the S&P did that year. As a result, plan assets kind of followed suit, right? I would not look at this and go, oh my God, the company's in so much trouble. But if we look at other things like the average participant account balance, if you see that increasing sharply, it can often mean that the firm, excuse me, has stopped hiring new employees into the company, because new employees will come with a $0 balance, and they tend to act as a brake on the average account balance. The fewer of those guys there are, the more that the large account balances of the senior people have an impact on the overall aggregate numbers. So those are just two ways that you can use this data to get more insight into a firm. Let's swap over to looking at the defined benefit plan. So this is what we were talking about earlier. This is the more traditional pension plan. And here we can see some of the same stuff. We've got the number of people in the plan. Notice sharply less, right? We had many hundreds in the DC plan that was available for everybody to participate in. Here we're looking at a plan that's probably only available to a select few, and we can actually see that here in the eligibility text block. So we actually went into these disclosure forms, pulled out the eligibility, and we can see here it's a cash balance plan, right? We can see that this is only open to employees who are equity partners, principals, or one of the many C-suite guys, CFO, CMO, CAO, CIO, and the president and COO, right? Those are the ones who can be in it. Non-equity partners? Sorry. Associate attorneys? Nope. Of counsel? You're not going to find them in here. So there's a lot of cool stuff that we can see here. We were talking about making sure that the pension liabilities are being correctly funded. That we find here in the target funding attainment. Anything over 100% is a great big thumbs up. That's what you want to see. You want to see that they're putting in enough money to meet their anticipated pension obligations. Now, that's not to say that this is enough money to pay out all the obligations right now today. It means that they might have obligations. There's an actuary somewhere that anticipates that they'll have pension obligations of $80 million 20 years from now, right? And they want to make sure that they've got X million dollars in assets now that's going to grow to meet those obligations as the plan ages and as the people age out through the plan. Here we can also see that first big figure I was talking about, $42,000 per participant put into this DB plan by the firm. So you want to get to a place where you're one of these eligible people, right? You want to get into the plan and start making that free money.
So I've got a question for you real quick on this. As I'm looking at the screen here, and I'm looking at the dispersion of age, where we see that they're 35 to 39, 40 to 44, et cetera, true. Now, we talk about the eligibility issue, which we'll come back to in just a second as well, because I think that's fascinating for a lot of people that are on this call right now. But as we look at this, is this active participants only that are active in the firm, or is this active participants and those that are maybe not practicing anymore, no longer with the firm, and are still included? Is this an actual breakdown of the age of the attorneys, of the equity partners in the firm? Is probably the question I'm asking.
So it's going to be a good proxy for that, yes. Because these obligations continue to exist even when someone retires or separates from the firm, if they were a participant, we would still see them in here. We can see that there are 17 retired participants still within the plan, still accruing and ultimately drawing benefits. The table that we've got here, so there are two key elements of this table. The first is the age, right? How old these people are. This we find on is legally required, right? In any one of these defined benefit plans, because the document that does the disclosure, the goal is to make sure that the employer is putting away enough money to meet its pension obligations. There is a lot of actuarial, number crunching that goes into this as well. So we need to know the ages of the people, because we need to know how long they're going to live and how much we might need to pay them. We've also got on the top the completed years of credited service. Now, you'll notice big wall here at 1 to 4 years. This does not mean that this firm has no attorneys who've been there for more than 4 years, and I can't stress that enough. What we're actually seeing here in the years of credited service, we're talking about credited service towards the plan. As the economy grows and shifts and changes, sometimes we find companies will kind of restate their DB plan, or they'll shutter the old one and migrate people into a new one, and that's what happened here. So they picked up a new plan just a couple of years ago, and we can see that it's not yet 4 years old. So all these people kind of got grandfathered in, and so we'll see these kind of go out and out and out over the coming years. But what we can see here with the ages is, if you want to use this for purposes of figuring out kind of what's the average age of these equity partners, this is a great way to do it, because there are not going to be equity partners. Let me put it this way. When the company's putting in $42,000 a year, people who are eligible to participate in the plan are going to participate in the plan. And so, yes, it does serve as a very good proxy for every equity partner at the firm. And we can see here the age distribution. This is actually a fairly, it's an older firm than a lot of the ones that I've looked at when doing this research and compiling this data. We did not see a lot of firms that have, such a significant portion of their people. Here we got 40 of 200 in the 65 and over bracket. So that's a full, 25%, 20%. 20% of the equity partners are 65 or older. That's interesting from a succession planning standpoint, and also from potentially looking at this from an M&A standpoint.
No, absolutely. The other part I wanted to point out real quick too, Eric, because there's a couple of questions I have for Liz, but I wanted to just kind of get your take on something, because you, along with Karen Beltry, who's our director of product management, you guys spent a lot of time over the Christmas holidays actually manually extracting a lot of information from 5500s to put into the database. And as we were looking down at the eligibility and general plan info, we see there that we're bringing up the business professionals with the C-suite titles. And just from a pure sort of ballparking perspective, as you were doing this, did you see a lot of non-C-suite first chairs in plans that were being brought into the equity partner plan? Or typically when you saw the business professionals being brought in, were they more the C-suites that were being brought into the same plans as the partners?
So when we did see non-legal staff in here, it was definitely very heavy into the C-suite. In fact, I'm honestly a little surprised to see the CMO and CAO in here. For the most part, we saw CEO, COO, and CFO were the common C-suite titles that we saw the most. I will say that there were a lot of firms that didn't limit it to just equity partners. It was every partner. And so that is, it's not precisely unusual, but there were definitely a lot of firms that had it more broadly available to the legal staff. I will say, I did not see a single firm that explicitly included of counsel, and I saw many firms that explicitly excluded of counsel.
Okay, interesting. We talked a little bit about how you're utilizing this from a recruiting perspective. I know a lot of people who are on this call right now who fall into the CKO or CIO or CMO, CMBDO range. That's something that obviously this is of great interest to them when they're being recruited by other firms or they're considering other opportunities. The ability to go in there and see, sort of an apples to apples comparison, especially if they've got multiple options on the table for them. And so we talked a little bit about that from a recruiting perspective, but Liz, I want to come back to you and just kind of given your background on some of this. When you start looking at this from the business perspective, let's go outside of recruiting for just a second. When you go outside of the recruiting side and you look at some of the other business use cases for this data, where are you focusing and what are you looking at it for?
Well, I think we're looking at a cash balance plan here, but for either the cash balance plan, which has the defined benefit element to it, and a defined contribution plan, once again, I think an officer like a CFO or the CEO is going to look at this as financial information, and therefore it is perfectly used for mergers and acquisitions, deal making. So when you think about the M&A process, you've got pre-deal due diligence, then due diligence, and eventually you get to the deal closure and then the post-merger integration. But if a law firm is going to be working on acquiring another big law firm or any law firm, I guess, then they want to see what is their risk as far as taking on the pension plans, the pension obligations of the firm they're either merging with or acquiring, because it is a big risk. And I've been reading about articles. There are some people who research this, particularly in the law field, and they talk about the funded status of these plans and what a huge risk it is. They call it a ticking time bomb. But for a pre-deal due diligence process, this is really important information. And the data that we have in Judy Diamond, in Legal Compass, is enough to give the CFO a sense of what kind of risk would they be taking on if they were to merge or acquire that firm. So that's a pretty obvious example. But then something that Eric alluded to earlier, the Chief Human Resources Officer. They're going to want to take a look at this during an M&A process, or even if they're revisiting their benefits strategy. Let's say the law firm is going to start looking at total rewards compensation strategy. Total rewards meaning, how much salary, what are the benefits, lots of other things go into total rewards. But the retirement benefits are always a big piece of that pie, of a total rewards pie. And so they can get a sense of that also from this data. So, once again, there are a lot of uses for it. I could go on. And if anybody wants to have a sidebar conversation, just send an email through and I'd be happy to talk to you.
I think that's clearly proof that we have been inundating Liz with a lot of legal speak over the last 6 months, because she's dropping the term sidebar now, just in regular conversation. It's just muscle memory at this point. So let's sort of wrap this point up. I know there's a couple of questions that have come in. There's a lot of questions that have come in, actually, but a couple that we'll have time to get to here real quick, and we'll answer some others after as well too. But Eric, when you're talking about how recruiters are utilizing this information, based upon all the conversations that you and I have had, Karen had, we all had leading up to this, as we're doing the due diligence on adding this information to Compass. What can you kind of walk us through from your findings?
Yeah, so in trying to evaluate either your own company's plan or the plan of another company, it really all comes down to 3 key elements: eligibility, free money, and sustainability. Eligibility is simply who can be in the plan. Is it open to all attorneys, or just partners, or just executives? We've seen some DB plans that are actually for secretarial staff. Not many, but there are some. We also want to know, when can new hires begin to participate? Sometimes there is a freeze-out period where they can't be in the plan until they've put in 1,000 hours, or 2,000 hours, or 2, or sometimes even 3 years of service. And then, of course, just because a company has a lucrative defined benefit plan doesn't mean that it's necessarily accepting new people. So that's one of the things that you're going to want to look at as you are kind of evaluating, your options and your total rewards compensation. As far as free money goes, really there are two key items here. The first is what is the profit sharing, if any. Profit sharing is different from a match rate. So most 401k plans offer a match. Here at ALM, if we put in, for every $1 up to 6% of our total salary, they'll match 50 cents, right? That's the matching. In addition to that, there might be a profit sharing. If we make more than, X million dollars, everybody gets a 2% cut of whatever that is, and that can add up. A lot of law firms are scheduled in the same way. Also, with regards to the free money, if there is a defined benefit plan, how do you get in there and how do you get the most out of that plan? And then finally, sustainability. How long can the firm keep this up? Are they getting overeager, offering all these benefits they know they've got to pay for someday, but that day is in the future? All you got to do is ask GM how that goes, and you know that it's something that you want to look at very carefully. What does the cash flow look like at the firm? How are they increasing or decreasing their contributions? What do they feel like they can actually provide beyond what's in the initial plan documentation? And I think that's a good place to kind of wrap up the retirement information. I know we've only got 5 minutes left in our actual allocation, but if you guys want to stay late, we might go over a little bit and talk about the other new item in Legal Compass, which are the league tables. Patrick, should I kick this back over to you?
Yeah, and of course, as you well know, and those of everybody that's on here that know me, I can pretty much get through this like the guy in the old Federal Express commercials from the 70s. I mean, we can whip through this in lightning speed. Eric, there's one question that came in, and just for everybody, there's a lot of questions that are coming in, and we are going to take the time this afternoon and email everybody back. But there's one that came in I thought was really interesting, because as you and I were talking about this, I mentioned that when I was doing a lot of consulting work and doing a lot of strategic plan work and that sort of stuff, that we would sometimes look at competitors who we knew had age out policies, right? And they had mandatory retirement ages. We would look at that in a way of sort of creating predictive models around which firms were going to have to make moves at some point from a succession perspective, and whether or not our attorneys were going to be at risk and all that sort of stuff. Is this, through all the data that you're capturing, are you able to capture the mandatory retirement ages that firms are setting in their bylaws?
So the answer is probably not, with a but attached to it. So within the disclosure document, there is no place that says, here is the mandatory retirement age that's set up in the bylaws. However, what they all do have to have is, for actuarial purposes, something called the normal retirement age. And the normal retirement age is set up by the plan when the plan kind of springs into existence. The idea being that the actuaries who are crunching the pension obligations for each individual versus the money in the plan, how they're going to pay that out, they need to have a potential end date in mind for when these people might retire. Thus, you've got normal retirement age. We find a lot of 61, 62, 63 for those years. I wouldn't go so far as to say that that is the mandatory age. There's nothing legally in the plan documentation that compels a retirement at that point, but the normal retirement age is an important factor to consider. It is in the documentation. We have not yet captured that for every firm. Depending on audience reaction to this new feature, we might revisit this, go back, and extract yet more information. So if you want to find that, you can do it with some digging, but it's not currently being surfaced within Legal Compass.
All right, great. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate that. And Liz, thank you very much as well, too. And for everybody, we're getting more questions coming in now. We will, like I said, we will get back to everybody later today individually with answers to those. There's some really good questions coming in, too. All right. Well, as Eric mentioned, because we do everything, first of all, if everybody can tell, Eric and I have a background, and both of us have a background in radio. So this is our version of Two for Tuesday, which some of you of a certain age might remember that all the rock stations used to always do in their format. So everything was a Two for Tuesday. And here we are. We're going to bring league tables into this as well, too. So we launched this a few months ago. And essentially, what this comes down to is very simple. One of the things that ALM is known for is the rankings. And there's a lot of data as you look at this that you'll see are standard in the AmLaw 200 rankings, right? The revenue per lawyer, the profits per equity partner, you know, the AmLaw rank, the profit per equity partner rank, RPL rank, et cetera. But one of the things that became really interesting is that we use that data in a variety of ways here. We also capture other data points through data gathering that we include within Legal Compass as well. And we get a lot of requests, believe it or not, from recruiters, from legal departments, from law firms saying, hey, is there any way that you guys could present this information this way so we could see, you know, a top list of firms that meet this criteria, or we can look at the high level trends between, you know, over a period of time, even for things like revenue per lawyer and how that is changing over a period of time, or it's increasing or decreasing. Or as we talk about the segmentation of firms, you know, how certain segments are performing against each other. So during the Legal Week 2020 State of the Industry, one of the things that James Willer and Heather Nevin presented, for example, was the characteristics and the KPIs of the firms that over the last 5 years have improved in the AmLaw rankings versus those that had decreased in the AmLaw rankings. And you can see, even on the screenshot right here, we put in where the rank changes are. And it's interesting when you start going through the segmentation, sometimes when you look at certain types of firms or certain rankings, where you start seeing a lot of red arrows or green arrows, you know, that are signifying decreases or increases. But it was interesting when we isolated those firms that had increased versus those that had decreased, what common characteristics were there. So let's first start at the segmentation side as we go into this. And one of the things that you'll see here from the screenshot is that we've got it defined with the AmLaw 50, the AmLaw 100, the second 100, but also firms that fall into other categories. And the quick disclaimer on this is very simple, is that there's a lot of firms that could go into multiple categories. And so in some cases, putting one into one box was difficult. We are going to get complaints on it, and people are going to disagree, and we fully get that, which is why we put the custom range in there as well, too. Because no matter, it's just like industries, no matter how we define or how companies are defined, they always touch a variety of different areas as well, too. So we kind of put that in there to address the issues with regard to how do I create my own groups from this. So we have capital markets, we have multi-jurisdictional footprints, we have firms that are more regional firms, we have firms that are specialists, so not just the IP firms and the labor employment firms, but also those that have a very unique focus into a very specific area of law. And what we did is we put these together with multiple segmentation options along with a variety of different overall market trends and top 10 lists. So as you can see from the right-hand side over here, we have 22 different market trends charts that are just overviews over a period of time, looking at various segmentations, but how they're trending in a general sense, as well as 31 of these top 10 lists across 3 different topics, and that's financials, it's headcount and footprint, and diversity. So if we go to a brief example here real quick, if we get into, for example, looking at the revenue split for the AmLaw 50 versus the AmLaw 150, and I've tracked this for years. We've shown this at Legal Week in the State of the Industry. If you go back actually about 20 years, the AmLaw 50 was right around 52% of the collective revenue for the AmLaw 200, where the remaining 150 firms were at 48%. And over the last 20 years, you know, the divide between these two segments has continued to widen. And even in the last 5 years, you can see this from 2015 through 2019, that the AmLaw Top 50 were slightly below 60% in their overall share of their total share of all the AmLaw 200 revenue. And in the last 5 years, even, that's moved up to roughly 62%. And so this becomes really interesting as we look at this, because it means that there's 75% of the firms that are getting an increase, that are getting a decreasing share of a rapidly increasing market. And that leads to a lot of complexity. And that's one of the things that we obviously look at, but we wanted to put that data point into this platform for everybody else to be tracking it as well too. So along the financial metrics, we're getting into a lot of the things that you typically will see with the AmLaw data, right? Revenue trends, profit trends, cost per lawyer trends, margins, market share trends, et cetera. Again, that's available across a variety of the metrics through there. Another one that we decided to do was then put in the segmentation aspect of it and look at those trends as well. And this to me is really interesting, because as we look at this, it's kind of hard to see the AmLaw 200 in the blue line there, because the multi-jurisdictional footprint trend line is almost right on top of it. But you'll see the capital markets firms, not surprisingly, are much higher. You know, a lot of that is driven through the M&A activity, the valuation of deals, the volume of deals, et cetera. Those revenues are typically higher. But you'll also see, though, with the regional firms and the specialist firms, the trend line continues, right? So they're all increasing through there. So while the capital markets firms continue to be head and shoulders in terms of value, average revenue per lawyer value, what you are seeing, what you do see, though, is that all the segments are continuing to increase as well. So moving into a different one, now when we start slicing it down and looking at the top 10 list, so this is a really good example here. This is just slicing out by regional firms, and it's looking at the greatest growth in revenue from last year to this year. And you'll see Clark Hill on there, Butzhalter, Munger Tolles, Lowenstein, Greenspoon, Logan Loeb, et cetera. So kind of getting through there, able to see this graphic, for example, here with the growth in revenue. There's multiple segmentation options. And this is something that I want to hit on this right here, as long as the next slide. They're also very good for recruiting and retention uses. This is not something that we're going to utilize to put in front of clients. Obviously, we know we have some legal department attendees on this as well, but this is not something that when we walk into a pitch that we're necessarily going to put on this slide, nor are we going to put the growth in revenue per lawyer or the growth in profits per equity partner, nor are we going to put those onto slides that we utilize for business development purposes. But we are going to do that for internal retention perspective uses, for recruiting uses as well. So a couple of things to point out. One, we saw the previous slide, as we were kind of going through this, Eric brought this up to me as well. He said, why is Clark Hill so much greater than everybody else? And it's because they went through a merger, right? So we looked at, in that case, we're looking at a lot of that revenue growth is driven off of more producers. And they also grew their revenue per lawyer fairly well, but they also added quite a few producers. When we get into the other league tables here around greatest growth for regional firms in RPL or greatest growth in profits per equity partner, a couple of things really stand out. One is, firms like Munger, Tolles, and Buckley, year over year, they are producing great results. Outstanding firms producing great results. With Tucker, Sullivan, and Wooster, they're all sort of right up there with the growth in RPL year over year. What's interesting is only 3 of those firms are also showing up in the league table on the right-hand side, which is growth in profits per equity partner. Sullivan and Wooster, Tucker, and Stoll Reeves out of Portland, Oregon, are the ones that are showing up in this. Now, a lot of this, by the way, is driven in some cases by changing leverage models. And one of the things that we talked about extensively at the State of the Industry at Legal Week was the fact that over the last 20 years, you've seen a dramatic shift and decline in the percentage of equity partners as a share of overall ALM 200 partnership. Right? And we've seen that from last year moving into this year too. A lot of firms are changing their leverage models, and this is important. We talked about this in a couple of sessions. We've done it on the Law.com Pro webinar as well too, where making sure that we're delivering ROI back to our partners is not only a key recruiting tactic, but it's also a key retention tactic as well too. So that changing leverage model is important. But the 2 things I did want to point out from this, one was that, but the second part is also the fact that it's not just revenue that's driving this growth. And so we are seeing firms that are doing both. The revenue model, the leverage model is changing, but the revenue growth is also there as well. And that's really important to see that revenue per lawyer that is increasing. As we move on to another slide too, we try to look at information from other aspects that's not currently everywhere in Legal Compass in this form, and that's something like this, which is the highest percentage of lawyers outside of the U.S. And I sliced this down to regional firms. And as we look at this and how we utilize this, this is something that we can utilize for business development. This is something that we can utilize for recruiting, right? Is that ability for, as we talk to potential laterals, as we talk to potential clients, say, look, we are expanding our footprint. We are growing outside of the U.S. We are prepared to continue growth and make sure that we are pushing our strategy forward. We've added this to a variety of additional league table examples. So there's traditional AMLAW metrics, there's cost per lawyer metrics, compensation, footprint, office growth. For the law school attendees in through here, a lot of information around law school graduates, partners, and associates. I think for the law schools, there's a lot of ways of utilizing the data that's in here for marketing purposes and for attracting students and convincing them to go to certain law schools, because we are ranking those schools and putting the league tables in there by number of partners in the ALM 200 or regional firms, et cetera. We're also getting into things like associate satisfaction and diversity. So we'll end here on diversity. And this is one I thought was really interesting as well, is the percentage of female partners at regional firms. And so as we slice this out, there's, we look at the specialty firms, for example, we see a lot of the immigration boutiques are really, really strong with diversity. But when you look at regional firms, this is a great slide to be able to put into a business development deck. Like, be able to walk in knowing the amount of impact, or the amount of attention, I should say, that is on diversity right now. And so we're breaking this up both by gender and traditional diversity as well, with minority attorneys, minority partners, et cetera. But this is something to me that I think is really impressive, because when you are in that pitch and you're at Marshall Dennehy or Brownstein or Quarles, and you're able to put this slide up there as part of the reasons why your firm should be retained, knowing that that client is really interested in diversity and your commitment to diversity, and to put the Mansfield status up there and some of the other initiatives that the firm is doing, this really becomes a proof point that is necessary. And one of the things I love about this is, for years of doing this work, especially working with legal departments as well, and asking them, why are you hiring certain firms over other firms? One of the things that's been a consistent issue that has come up is that there's a myth versus reality area, is that they get certain characteristics of firms branded into their brains, and they don't necessarily change. And so the ability to put some of this data in front of them and change the narrative becomes very, very important, especially for firms that are not in Aquitas's big brand list every year. And so this, to me, is a really important feature, that when we start adding the data around league tables and the ability to slice it into different segmentations, position the firm differently, and change the narrative in some cases for what attorneys that you're recruiting might be thinking, or clients might be thinking, this is a really important feature. So we're going to end there. We are going to have more of these to follow in terms of diversity metrics. We're working with Karen Stacy and Diversity Lab. As I think a lot of people know, we have partnered with them on Move the Needle Fund, and we are working with them on the Mansfield work as well. And so we'll have more metrics that we are developing with Diversity Lab coming out that will be part of this. But for now, we'll end there. I know we went a little bit over, in part because we were getting a lot of questions and a lot of great information on the benefits data. We're also getting some, I'm seeing coming in here now for the league tables as well. So we'll be answering a lot of those this afternoon and getting back to everybody. Before I go, I don't want to go without first thanking Eric and Liz for all their time, the preparation, all the work put into this. So Eric, Liz, any final thoughts before we wrap up for the day?
Just to say thank you for giving me a platform to talk about the super exciting world of retirement plans. They don't often let me out of my cage, so it was great to join you.
And it was a pleasure bringing the business perspective to this. I think you know, it's a pretty good mix we've got going here.
Perfect. Well, guys, thank you very much for all your work, for all the attendees. We appreciate it very much. Thank you for spending an hour of your time with us. We do have a lot of questions that have come in. We are going to get to those this afternoon. So, you know, please look for those from Eric, Liz, myself, and other members of the team. Thank you all again. And if anybody has any additional questions, just reach out to any of us. We're happy to help and answer any questions that we possibly can. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day today.